Sarah Winston. Careful, I got the mic. Hi, everyone. Welcome to CPW for our weekly evening series, Meet the Artist, brought to you for free to attend by Arnold and Augusta Newman Foundation. Allows us to host this each week, which is very fun for us because we love to see you all. And my name is Sarah Danziger. I'm the education program manager here. And chances are, if you have a question, I can answer it. So I'm going to have a couple announcements before we get started. We are rounding out our summer photography workshop series. So if you've been eyeing some of our things this summer, I can tell you that this weekend we've got some very exciting offerings. We are joined by Meg Turner, who's actually in the house. Meg, raise your hand. Woo! Meg's going to be teaching from pixels to paint, screen printing for photography. So for all of you that are interested in kind of seeing your work sort of transmute into ink through screen printing process, we're going to be here tomorrow printing transparencies, and then Saturday and Sunday we're going to be at a local neighborhood print studio actually burning screens and doing screen printing. 2 spots left, yes. So I will be there. I already prepared my image. I'm very excited. And then on Sunday we'll be joined by Martha Naranjo Sandoval, who some of you may know as a recently MAC published photographer, but also has her own incredible, I absolutely love her Meta Real Editions imprint where she publishes other artists. And she's going to be here teaching a zine making class. We called it Bound Futures Analog Zines because the idea is that we're going to be crafting these zines by hands from already printed materials. So you bring your misprints, bring your 4x6 prints, bring your magazines, bring your text, bring your, whatever it is that's already in the physical form to, we have literally thousands of magazines to collage with, and then we'll run it through our digital press and you'll leave with an edition of like 20 to 30 zines. So I can offer that at a very enticing price of just the cost of materials. So if anyone's interested, that's on Sunday and we still have some space. So please, talk to me afterwards if you're interested. And that's all I'm going to get into for now. We have many more things to talk about, but I'll leave it to our 2 incredible guests tonight, Regina DeLuise and Saskia Kahn, Guggenheim Fellow and Faculty Emerita at Maryland Institute College of Art. Regina DeLuise has worked in the medium of photography for 4 decades. She continues to shoot film and work with an 8x10 large format view camera. Her work is represented in private and public collections, including the Museum of Modern Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, Brooklyn Museum, Art Institute of Chicago, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Smithsonian Museum of American History, Houston Museum of Fine Art, and the Canadian Center for Architecture in Montreal. DeLuise was represented by Bonnie Ben Ruby Gallery in New York City for 25 years and has exhibited her work nationally and internationally since 1990. She's been awarded residencies at Bagliasco Foundation, Mass MoCA, North Adams, and was the 2018 Meredith Moody Fellow at Yaddo in Saratoga Springs, New York. Her work was included in Migrations and Meaning in Art, curated by Dr. Deborah Willis in January 2020, and has had 2 solo exhibitions in New York City, 2022 and 2024 at Rick Wester Fine Art, where she is currently represented. Regina DeLuise's first monograph, The Hands of My Friends, which can be found right over here, was published by St. Lucie Books in 2024 and has been reviewed in such publications as The Guardian, Lens Scratch, Border Crossings, and Aesthetica magazine. And tonight, Regina will be joined by Saskia Kahn, is a photographer and educator based in Baltimore, Maryland. She earned her MFA in photography, media, and society, and is a professor of photography at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Brooklyn Rail, and Be More Art, and is exhibited by New York City Parks. Kahn's practice blends portraiture and alternative processes to explore themes of memory, displacement, and the connections between people, and place. So thank you. We give them a warm welcome, and we'll get started. All right.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the lovely introduction. I wanted to just start off by saying thank you to Nicole and to Anna for inviting me, and Saskia to be here tonight. It's a very wonderful invitation to receive. I know the series well. I got COVID last summer and kind of missed all the ones that I had intended to see, but I'm really happy to be here. And I also wanted to thank you, Saskia, for being willing to be in conversation with me. I feel like it's a warmer way to discuss the work. This is, the work you'll be seeing here is the book. So it'll be looped around, and we'll be touching in on what you're looking at. I also wanted to just say that this time is so awful and difficult for everyone, and I am really happy to be in community. It feels like the only thing that really sort of settles me down. So I'm really happy to be here with you, and thank you all for being here.
Yes. Thanks. Yeah, so Regina and I met when I moved to Baltimore. It was the height of the pandemic to go to graduate school, which is a pretty good thing to do during a pandemic, I think. But somebody who's also friendly to CPW, who might be here, Leslie Deschler-Canosi, who met Regina years prior at MICA, Maryland Institute College of Art, said these really lovely parting words when I was leaving New York City, which was stick with Regina when you get to MICA. That was really, really good advice. And I was fortunate to be a teaching assistant for two very special classes that Regina taught there, the body and photography and alchemy of light. And we've become good friends. I'm really grateful to talk about photography with a very lovely friend. So one of the things that I think is sort of mysterious about your work that you sort of sum up and said in the very start of this beautiful book is a quote by Hélène Cixous, which is, "I would like to be able to take a photo of a dream." And I think you have done that so beautifully. There's this portrait of you that's in the beginning of the book. It was earlier in the slides where you're with your 8x10 camera and you're on a mountain shrouded by fog and you're like in the dream as well. So I was hoping you could kind of tell us about how do you enter that dream space, because I imagine with setting up an 8x10 camera, there's some premeditation involved with, you know, when, where, who you'll take a photograph of. So is there something that draws you in to like why make a picture and set your camera up? And I'll pass you back the mic so we can hear from you.
When I found that quote, as the book was coming into being, and I knew that I wanted to use that photograph of myself photographing. Someone made that picture. I was on a meditation retreat for a month in the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont, and if I wanted to make any pictures, I had to do them very early in the morning. So I was out and I had no idea that that person was photographing me, and there were others, and that struck me as very odd and lovely. I think the pictures are really interesting, and I don't generally get that view, obviously get a view of them myself. But it did appear to me as if I was a dream, and so when I found the quote, I really thought of that in context to the idea of trying to make this book that encapsulated the work of 40 years, and just the whole endeavor of being an artist and, addressing, moving towards moving towards your instinct, moving towards the light that is attracting me, seeing what it is that I'm really curious about. And then, there is a kind of alchemy that just happens. And so I was really excited to put that beside that image as a way to talk about that moment, and also to talk about the larger idea of what we do and what we, hope to do.
So yeah, I mean, those of us, so this is a book that spans 4 decades and many countries. And I know a little bit, maybe you want to share about how when you were the Guggenheim Fellow, you had been traveling a lot, but specifically in the book, there's a representation of Italy into different decades of your life. So I just wanted to invite you to reflect on, the span of time that exists within this book, and also maybe the touchstones of starting in Italy and coming back to that place.
Coming back to Italy, yeah. Well, I talked about Italy as my creative home for a lot of years early on. I studied at SUNY Purchase with, and there's some wonderful people in the audience that I studied with, and I started working with the 8x10 there. And I was talking with Deborah this morning about the fact that I was going off to Italy between my junior and senior, and our teacher and friend Jed Devine said, yeah, you can take the 8x10. So I took the camera with me. Honestly, I'd never used it until I got there. Shot 200 sheets of film backwards. But my mom was born in Italy, and I was there as a child with my family. And there was something so planted in my mind when I was a child that I really could not wait to be there again. And it turns out that that particular trip in 1979, really, there's work in this book from that experience. There's a way that I feel more at home there than I feel here, and there's a way that not really knowing the language, but being so completely comfortable with the culture, really allowed me to sort of be part of it, but also have enough distance that I could observe, and I could, kind of move towards what I was interested in. And, it was a friendly, I was with my family. I was with my extended family, my mother's cousins and, their children. And again, I was having, developing friendships with these people who we didn't speak the same language, but we spoke the same language. We were just, there was just a sort of a heart connection about the place. So it really remained, any time that I had money or time, it's really where I wanted to be. And I felt a real fluidity about being, being in that space. After Purchase, I went to New York to work for Daniel Wolfe Gallery for 2 years. And my idea to go to graduate school was not about getting a degree at all. It was really about buying time. Like I was like, okay, this thing about having a job and being an artist, I was trying to find the balance, as we all had to do at one point. So I went off to Italy. I found a program that actually didn't have a photo department, but it had really interesting professors, and they allowed me to create my own, design my own major, basically, design my experience.
So that was your second trip back to Italy?
Yeah, it was the second significant period of time that I spent there, and I spent 2 years there.
So yeah, I think we, but so then I want to, so was it the second trip during this program when you met, you have to remind me her name, that you wrote about? Yeah, do you want to tell the story that, of your teacher there? And because I know you opened the book with that essay.
Sure. So when I was at Purchase and after I graduated, the emphasis of my work was really the body and portraiture is really what I was focused on entirely. So I went to Italy and was confronted by this, very beautiful landscape that is highly seductive and enormously cliche and, difficult to kind of understand how I was going to approach it. And I didn't make good pictures for a long time. I was really flailing around and, looking at things very broadly. And Itza Petrosani was a painting teacher. She's a beautiful Italian painter who was quite elderly when I was studying there. I was there in 83 and 84, and she was, she only spoke Italian. She was very incredible. She smoked a lot of cigarettes, and she had a really, really raspy voice, and her clothes all have burn marks from the cigarettes. She was beautiful. There'll be a picture of her here, and you'll see a painting of Maurice Ravel was her uncle. I mean, she was just kind of a spectacular person. But she walked into my studio and she kind of, made this grand gesture and saw a picture that wasn't very good of two trees. And she said, well, Dante said that all you need is two trees to make a landscape. And I was, that just struck me at the right moment when I thought, well, of course, these pictures that I'm making are not intimate. There's no connection. There's no sort of me in relation to this land, So that really helped me quite a lot in terms of finding my way into a new genre for myself, landscape photography, and then really into this book. So, would you want me to talk? I think, yeah.
How you got into the book.
Oh, yeah.
Of course. You want to know.
I think, to
The grounding.
yeah, so grounding a book that represents this much time was something that was very hard for me to conceive of. But I think, again, sort of thinking about that conversation that I had with Itza, or that declaration that was quite simple but ended up being pretty profound for me, was a really solid place for me to start, And then, yeah, it was 40 years ago, but I could sort of use that as a touchstone, use that as an anchor for the book in terms of like what was important, what remained important, and I could kind of go back and forth in the writing about, from that place.
Yeah, I would love for you to mention when Mark Durant, who runs St. Lucie Press, came to you, invited you to do a book project, and the amount of images that,
So I had a show with Rick Wester in 2022, and Mark came up to see the show, and when we were back together in Baltimore, he said, where's the book? You need a book. And, a number of people had said that to me in my life, but like a book, to me was completely intimidating. I had like no idea how to approach it, and it was just sort of outside of the realm of what I could sort of understand. So he had already started publishing St. Lucie books and said, he would love to do it if it didn't feel like a good match to me, that he wanted to help me find a publisher. So he was very, very generous. And of course, I did want to make a book with Mark because his books were beautiful. But we started, and he said, what I'd like you to do is find 50 what if there's one book that's going to be made of your work, like what are the 50 images that are going to be in it? So I started this kind of idea of editing, like my work, and I think I had 400 images to begin with. So it was kind of a editing was kind of a trip.
And I think, oh yeah. Oh, you want to try? Let's see. Let's see it. That would be nice. Oh, it's off. Hold on.
No.
It has a personality. But I think, so Regina's work with the 8x10 camera, all of the prints are also contact prints, and she prints these palladium prints straight from the negative. So it was also, when you say 400 images, for a digital shooter or something, that may not sound like a lot of an art. But when you think about plates and these negatives, that is so significant, because each one it's like picking out 400 sculptures in a way. They're so beautiful and pieces of art, each one. I want to come back to different mentors at some point, but why don't you tell us a little bit about how you first were introduced to photography?
I was introduced to photography. Well, actually, so I went to Catholic school. We had no art. We had like no music. I was in the choir, but there was like nothing extra. It was all, none of the good stuff. But so when I went to high school, I immediately started taking art classes. I was always making things as a kid, and so I kind of burned through all the art classes. And when I was a senior, there were no more to take, and I took photography as a total, like, okay, I'll try this. But held the camera and completely felt it was my, it was just my medium. So Robert Burns was an early teacher, and I was a kid, I was a child, but it really was just clear that that's what I wanted to use. There was an immediacy, and as much as I was not interested in machines and chemistry and all that stuff, I just loved it. And there was a kind of a magic to the darkroom for me too. There was just a real sort of a beautiful aspect of being in that space, which becomes ultimately very meditative, I think.
Also, one of the things that you write in your artist statement, and also it's in the book, about loving what you love leads you to your life. I think I'm paraphrasing there. But so a lot of the images that you're seeing are portraits of dear friends, or your father and your mother, or your niece and sisters. And I'm just wondering about like these relationships and what using your camera has allowed for you to, have as this like through line to them. Especially like looking through the book, it's filled with people that you love. Do you want to talk a little bit about who is in your body of work?
Yeah, I mean, I think not only because of the camera that I use, the camera that I use really impacts tremendously the way that the pictures look. It's slow and it's methodical and it takes time. So there's the way that whoever I'm photographing really needs to be sort of simpatico to the whole experience. And so, yeah, there are very few people in the book that I don't know intimately, know really well. I think that, well, if I could say, I was photographing Brenda yesterday and spent some time talking about the experience with her today. Maybe, my feeling is that the person that I'm photographing, and I've photographed a number of people in this room, which I love, I feel like the pictures that are most transcendent are when that person and I are it's a collaboration for sure. And that, if like these people, these people I photographed, they photographed this mother and daughter at the St. Lawrence River over many years. And I have about 4 versions of them on that rock, on that one rock. And I think that photography is so, one of the things that's so amazing about photography in general terms is how it identifies a moment in time and then how it doesn't do that. So obviously a picture of a mother and child over the years, or my niece is in this picture, in the picture as a 3-year-old on the couch, and then her daughter at 15 is also in the book. So, for me, this is part of the magic. This is part of what is so, taking a picture of a dream. It's like this is all very much a kind of a life review at a certain point, and I'm at that point now that I'm 66 and I've been doing this, and having the opportunity to look back. So I'm so grateful for all the people who are so vulnerable with me, with the camera, and who are patient with me, and who, allow me to kind of come into their spaces and to, that's what I love that picture. That's one of some of the people that I was studying with in Italy. This is a really dear friend, Tony Lasike, who I went purchase with, and is, it's very much still in my life. So, yeah, I think it would kind of be interesting to hear from the models too. But
I know. So yeah, I want to dig deeper into this because if you're willing to tell us some of your tricks for getting these super tender, like, it does feel transcendent, if I can use that word without it being too cringy. These moments of people where they just are in such repose, they're so relaxed, their gaze is so calm. Is there a dialogue beforehand? Are you saying anything after you get focus and, before you click the shutter? What are some Regina isms, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
I don't think there really are. I don't think I have any tricks. Nothing. I mean, I think, I think that it's a sincere invitation. When I want to photograph someone, when I feel compelled by the relationship, or by really feeling the need to document, because I know I won't see them again, or that, there are reasons, that are aesthetic reasons and emotional reasons, and and I think maybe the fact that it's a very sincere invitation is one thing, but I always think that it has to do with, well, I think that another aspect is that it does take me a long time, and that in my life, I think that a lot of people feel uncomfortable being photographed maybe with a small camera, or if you put a camera, up in front of someone, they get a kind of face on there. It's like, this is what, there's a presentation that they want to make. And perhaps with the 8x10, there's so much time with me moving the camera forward and back and under the dark cloth, and I kind of disappear, and then I come back, and I'm talking, I'm asking them to turn their head a little this way or that way, or, and then they're also willing to kind of go to a different space with me, or to like lay over a hay bale, or, I think that if I get interested and curious about a kind of a space and the way a body can be in that space or around an object, or that it's in the finding the picture together that maybe that tenderness comes through. But I mean, I think there's enormous generosity, that is always on the other side of the lens. It's just like, it just feels like, a real gift to me that people are willing to allow me the kind of access to this experience, and not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing what it will be, So that's my impression from my side.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of mystery. I think it's almost like no one knows what it's going to be with the view camera, in the way that with an iPhone we can sort of, like we're all kind of culturally understanding what the picture is going to look like, even if we're on the other side of the camera. So it's interesting. This is more of a comment than a question, but the way you photograph hands is so beautiful, and like the way that oftentimes the hands are becoming lines that are just leading us or holding the head in such a beautiful way. Like there's one image that may have passed already of like where the two fists, yeah, are holding up the head. I love that image, but it's like, interesting to wonder how the two hands came up into that motion. But maybe it was all mysterious at that time. One person that does talk about the experience of being on the other side with you is a collaborator in this book who wrote a really beautiful essay at the end of the book. Your friend, Felicia McCarran, who's a performance historian and a dancer and a choreographer and knows a lot about dance, academic. And she writes about how precious it was to be photographed by you at different points in her life. And the essay is really about the gift of seeing oneself through a friend. Do you want to talk about, how you know Felicia and why you decided to invite her or to photograph her and then to invite her to collaborate on the book?
So Felicia McCarran and I met when I was in grad school. We both went to the Villa Schifanoia. It was, and I stayed for 2 years. Felicia, it wasn't really the right spot for Felicia. She was there for only a semester, but she and I, Tom and Anna, that picture I pointed out of the couple, we were all together. It was a small cohort of people, and we just connected. I mean, she was a dancer at the time, so I was photographing her. Oh, that's Itza Petrosani. Yeah, beautiful Itza. Yeah. So again, like the people that I'm near are the people that I'm looking at and the people that I become curious about and want to take pictures of. So we did a lot of work together. She was really a great person to work with, and we became close. So she left Italy, but we stayed friends, and we've over all these years. What was very interesting, I think, what happened over all these years is that when the book came to be a possibility, and I realized I had to write something, which was a huge sort of idea. I really wanted Felicia to be part of that, and Mark reached out to her and talked to her about contributing to the book, and he said, he wanted to know if she would write for this book, and she said, I've been writing about Regina for 40 years, because I've been watching her watch and take pictures for, my whole life, basically, So it was really moving to me that she, had been doing this work kind of on her own. She and I had often spoken about collaborating on a book. She's written many books. I had no idea what that would look like, and I was so happy that the opportunity sort of came to be. She's married to a man from Morocco, and I have been with Ali's family a number of times, with Felicia, with their son. The picture on the cover is a picture that I made in 2023 when I was with them at New Year's, and so I asked her if she would go up that ridge behind the tents, and I took that picture. It's really the only picture I've ever made where there's a part that I'm in, that my shadow, that myself is in. this is kind of, I don't know, this is like hokey or, but when she came down from that, so I took that picture and I was like praying to the gods that, you know, I didn't fuck it up, you know. It's just like, please, I have to get this home and get this, you know, I have to get this process. I mean, there's that whole thing about like making the picture and then you get home in a month and a half and then you process it, and you know, all this stuff that happens in between. So there is a certain kind of anxiety that goes along with that, especially now. When I was younger, it was less anxiety provoking, but I took that picture and I just knew it was going to be, you know, really important for me and for her. And when she came down from the dune, she said, I was looking across at the other dune, Regina, and I was watching my son, you know, and when I met you and you took the first pictures of me, I could never have imagined this life, you know. And it just, I wept, you know, I just like broke down, you know. It's like, so, I mean, that may be, you know, odd to say, but it was really, you know, she's a very significant collaborator, friend, you know, creative, you know, giver in the world. And I just am so like grateful to have had all those experiences and have, you know, documented for her life throughout, you know, a pretty tumultuous, you know, period of time. So, I don't know, is it?
It makes me emotional too. I mean, I think just to share a little bit about how I connect with that is that I had not, aside from like my sister or very, very close friends, photographed the same person repeatedly and built a relationship via photography until a few years ago. And it was a whole new way to have a relationship, the relationship which is your art, and where does the art end and the relationship begin. And there is something so like spiritual almost when the person who's allowed you to photograph their life appreciates that and kind of validates that the art has not just been meaningful for the art maker, but also for the person who has been seen and been the muse as well. So I think having that is very special and it's rare. Also because some purchase people are here too. I don't know how many were in the photo department with you, but you talk a lot, or you don't talk a lot, but you dedicate there's two dedications to mentors, Jed Devine and Jan Groover, and also to your students. So I was hoping you would talk a little bit about the role of mentors and mentoring in your life and what that's meant to you.
Yes, I dedicated the book to Jed Devine and to Jan Groover, and you know, there are a number of people in the room who studied with them and you know, could speak to the oversized influence they had on all of us. You know, I mean, I think that what I would say is that, you know, well, I didn't know any artists when I was growing up. You know, I had an uncle who was an actor and successful, but I didn't know any women, certainly, who were artists, and I didn't really know any artists. So it was all very mysterious to me. And there was something, I think one of the things that was so impactful for me at Purchase was just to, you know, it was in the SUNY system, it was new, there was all this energy, there were all these really interesting young artists from New York who now had these jobs, you know, and they would come up, and it was thrilling. Like, it was just thrilling to me to kind of start to understand what was possible in terms of having, you know, a life as an artist. So for me, you know, obviously I learned many things, but I think essentially it was like, what does it look like to be an artist? Like, what does that even mean? You know, and I think Jed and Jan especially really exemplified, lives that I admired and work that I admired. And, it was really different then. Like, they would come and we would have class with them, and it was a different kind of way of teaching. It was all critique and conversation, and then they would leave. Like, there was no texting, there was no email, there was no anything. Like, they left, and then you saw them the next week. And I just really remember, like, I really wanted to work hard. Like, I really wanted to work. I mean, that hasn't changed. Students are working, hard as ever. But what I mean to say is that there was a lot of space then to just take what we had been given and to just kind of, work with that material. And there was a way that I really wanted to have that conversation and see what they would say the next time, and it was beautiful. It was great and scary. And, I didn't speak very comfortably in critiques, and, made me really anxious, and my palms would sweat and stuff, but I would still love it. It still couldn't wait to kind of get back into that space. But years later, I became, I taught at Pratt when I was living in New York, and I taught as an adjunct for a number of years. When I moved down to DC and Baltimore, I was full-time at MICA and really had a very significantly different kind of experience than when I was an adjunct, where I could really form relationships and become committed to the students as they were to the work. It was, and then, if I was any good as a teacher, it was because of Jed and Jan. They were very generous, and they were very, they really didn't have a lot of ego around their work, and they really I really felt like they saw who I was as an artist, and they didn't, and I brought that to my students, and I understood that it's really, that's really very, there's so much to understand when you're a young artist. There's so much to learn. There's so much that can be really overwhelming. But, I think if there's a sort of recognition of, you're doing the right thing. You're here. And however I could help people find their own sort of vision, I wanted to help as much as I could because I was given so much. So, and then now I have students who are remarkable teachers, and that is really very exciting to me, so that this sort of legacy continues, both in teaching and in art making. I think that it's very layered, but again, it's a really beautiful part of my life, and one I'm really grateful to those two people, and to many other people along the way. But they were really my art parents in some way.
I know, it's kind of funny when you do something like this, you kind of, I would imagine, have a flooding of all the people who have supported you. Of course, there's many people. Get ready with some questions if you have them, because we're gonna wrap up. Or yes, it's about 6:50. But I have some things that came to mind. One, just to honor Jed Divine passed this year, and I think it's also just to have a moment that's he would have been so proud of this moment in the book. And I have visited Regina's house many times, and there's always been a recent postcard from Jed Divine. This was not a relationship that ended, in college. It was a long-lasting, really beautiful friendship. So I just wanted to say that. And also to your point about what you've done as a teacher, and back to that quote of loving what you love leads you to your life. So Regina came to guest critique during the class that then you kind of gave me the baton to teach the body in photography. And there was a lot of concern by students around making work about one's identity. And is it about, you know, like, is this work about queerness, like looking at a photograph, or is this work about my lineage, or, you know, in the photograph? And I remember after they met with you, I was like, how was critique with Regina? And they were like, it was amazing, because they were like, it is because you're making it, is what you had advised to them. Like, it's about all of those things because you're the one making it. You don't have to overthink the images. And I thought that was just really liberating and beautiful, and something that I think we need to exercise more, and like the play of just loving photography and making work. So I want to talk a little bit about what's kind of on the horizon in your mind now, after doing what you called the life review via, because, you know, it's interesting. My partner works in end of life healthcare, and they do something in that practice called life review to help, you know, build ownership over one's life. It's like supposed to ease the spirit, to create control over the narrative. So it's kind of interesting that you use that term. There's something that I picked up in your images. Here's an example of it. Like, a lot of things that are draped with cloth that are like covered in plastic or something. And it, for me, reads very much like maybe you know, bodies and death and things like that. So I wanted to ask you to speak to that, and some of the themes that now you're thinking about, having done this project.
Well, actually, you pointed that out to me about the drapery. I didn't quite. There were a couple of things that were pointed out to me by other people, but yeah, I do think that there's something about that shrouding of things that is really compelling to me. You know, I mean, I think it happens in drapes of clothing and drapes of window curtains and you know, other canvases, but it does kind of feel funereal in a certain way. And I mean, I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't exactly know how I feel about that, but I think one of the things that I have talked about a lot, sort of in the abstract, is this idea of giving up the ghosts, you know, just in, you know, in therapy and in conversations with my friends. And, you know, it's like, there's a way that I don't think I have experienced more loss at a young age than a lot of people. I lost some very significant people, you know, in my 20s and 30s. And I mean, I don't think that that's an unusual experience. But I don't know if that, you know, sort of somehow seeps in to the work and into who I am and how I move in the world and what I'm drawn to. But I do think, you know, now that the book is completed and I am moving into whatever comes next, there is this way that I want to think about that idea of giving up the ghost and what that means, and looking at pictures. You know, my mother was not one of the people that I lost very young. She died just a couple of years ago. But there are some images that I've made of her when I was young that I am revisiting now and really curious about, you know, and pictures that I took of my sisters and I, and, you know, thinking about my own childhood. And I don't know if that's gonna be a thing, but that is definitely something that I'm writing about and curious to really kind of delve into. And I think it's going to be a different kind of work. I mean, I think I've always worked in the field. I've always kind of gone out to like find my photograph, and to, you know, being in different countries is really, or in Italy, or not having the language. Like, I really, working in a way where the ground is not particularly solid, you know, is really important for me. It feels like it's very, yeah, it just keeps me very awake and aware and present. And, you know, what I'm finding is that working in a potentially different form, working in the studio, working with ideas more than visual, is giving me the same kind of feeling of the moving platform, which for me is very useful. So I'm really curious about what's going to happen next. But there's a picture of up here that's come around that's not in the book, but it's my mother's belly button. And we put it up there because I was talking about, as I was writing for some grants, for some residencies, we were having a conversation, and that picture really just seems like it could be a good place to start. Because I was in a dressing room with my mother when I was in my 20s, and like I saw her belly button for the first time, and it was like outie, you know, and I was shocked. She was modest, you know, she was modest. I was like, how could I've never seen your belly button? That's crazy. We're Italian, you know. But she said, yeah, when I had you, it popped out. I was like, oh my God, you know, can I photograph your belly button, you know? So she let me take that picture a long time ago. And now I think, well, you know, it's sort of the origin story, you know? It's like, well, that's a good place to start. Like, let me start with that. But anyway, yeah, so we put it up there, even though it's not in the book.
I love that. And I think we'll open it to questions if there are any. But I just wanted to say what came to mind when you're talking about transferring from maybe making work in the field or based on a residency location or a relationship where they are, back to that quote where we started. And now where you want to take a photo of a dream, you're taking this person or this place and you're entering into a dream space with the way that you were working in these images. Perhaps now, I mean, I always say I don't like to talk about images that aren't made yet because it doesn't really mean anything, but perhaps it's now going to be the dreams that come first that you're conjuring, and then as you structure the images. So it all comes back to that space. So maybe I know there's friends and curious minds in the audience. So do we need mics or?
I really enjoyed your presentation and seeing your work. It's really extraordinary. And everything you said was just terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, I'm sure that like for each picture, there's a story. And that, you know, if we were to go through each picture and you were to tell a story for like each one, you know, it would be a different kind of time, you know, it wouldn't be like 6 or 7, but I was just wondering about the story of the picture of the shoes.
Oh, the doll shoes?
Yeah.
So that was when I went, so I was the chair of the photo department at Maryland Institute College of Art. And after 4 years of that job, they offered me a residency. It was the first residency I ever did. It was at VCCA. And I thought, well, I have no idea what I'm going to do at this residency because I'd never been. And I just gathered up some things that I thought might be interesting. So I had collected these I found this like Barbie doll case on the side of the road in Catskill and, you know, threw everything else out, but kept the shoes. Didn't know what I was going to do with them. I had that, there's a picture of the hat box. That was an object that I found really interesting, had around, and I brought that, and I brought the book, The Hands of My Friends. That was a book that I grew up with, which wasn't called The Hands of My Friends. It's a handwriting analysis book from the 30s, and it had all these cool, like, translucent pages with like, what is the slant of the handwriting and what is the size and what, you know, and to me as a kid, it was really super cool because I loved the paper and I loved the idea of that. You know, there was one page that said The Hands of My Friends. So I just took them there and, that's where I started. And there was some really interesting things I thought that came from that residency. And those are 3 of the pictures. Yeah, pleasure.
So as someone else who was also raised in the Catholic Church,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of what you said about the role that played in your
Mm-hmm.
practice is interesting to me. Particularly, you see the role of ritual and reliquaries,
Mm-hmm.
shrouds, and there's a quality of life
Mm-hmm.
also that feels particularly mystical
Mm-hmm.
in a way that feels connected to Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about how, whether it's subconscious or conscious, that sort of foundational spiritual framework has shaped your practice and approach to photography?
I think that I can't say that was a conscious. I think that that's something that has occurred to me through the pictures. I think that I'm not a Catholic anymore. I'm a Buddhist now. But I think that there are things about Buddhism and the Dharma that, there were some good things for me within the Catholic faith and the ritual and the iconography and the space of quiet. I mean, that's kind of, that's something that I always gravitated towards. I think, I kind of lost my train of thought. I did have something that I was going to continue on. Oh, I'm sorry. I sort of, we'll come back to it, not conscious, but I think, I know what I was going to say. My mom was very Catholic, but she was also she was mostly spiritual. So she was reading Teilhard de Chardin, and she was, introduced me to Thomas Merton. And so that's why Catholicism isn't like totally, a negative for me. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for this very beautiful presentation of the lovely images, and I just looking through them, I can only imagine how beautiful they would be as a living friend, your originals, and how do you reconcile with having these images printed digitally? So
Right.
I do resonate, and it's always a disappointment when I look at my images digitally. So we have the same kind of.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it was, I make palladium prints, which are very specific in tone and in feel. And that was something that Mark and I talked a lot about early on. He did say, they're just not going to look like that, they're not gonna. And it was like, okay, got it, So, so I just had to kind of accept that. There's one maybe nod to, if you look at the book, I really wanted to have these vellum pages in the book. And I have printed on this type of paper, and I loved the translucent quality. I loved that it was something of a break, not so much chapters, but kind of a breath, But also I felt like it was a nod at least to the materials that I'm engaged with, so it may be a small thing, but I just had to kind of accept that was going to be the case. And we printed it in Italy, and I think they did a really beautiful job. So, but yeah, there's definitely something that you give up.
Really lovely presentation and conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I'm curious, you talked a bit about the editing of coming down from like 400 images down to 50 today. 2 questions there, if you can talk about how you whittle them down, what that process is like, and if you learned anything that surprised you, or if you saw themes that you didn't recognize before as you were looking back decades ago.
Yeah.
Life.
That was the first really interesting and difficult task. But I have a large body of work. I've traveled a lot with my camera, and so I sort of call those pictures the photographs in the field. So there was work, and I really don't consider that the same as the work that I did in Italy. So that was the first and that was the kind of the easiest actually cut. So there was work from India, from Nepal, from Bhutan, from places that were not part of my everyday experience. And I felt that if those pictures were going to be in the book, that there was going to have to be a whole nother conversation about what that is now and what it was then. You know, so that was a very large edit out, which was good. The book has 105 pictures in it, but it was a kind of a really wonderful dance that, like, I had I had this, group that I felt was really solid, but, Mark was really, it was really interesting to see the ones that I would push aside and then he would bring back, and there was another intern, a beautiful photographer named Sarah Hinterlong, who was a student and intern to Mark at the time. So she was really, really incredibly helpful as well. So it was funny. There were pictures that I wanted to take out that, like, the one of my mom with the balaclava. At the end, I'm like, okay, it's all perfect, but that one has to go. He was like, I can't, I felt in the end, that I felt surprised at some of the pictures I could let go of, but I think that the book kind of, and the sequencing, understanding that it wasn't going to be chronological, it wasn't going to be theme-based, it was going to be, a poetic relationship, image to image to image to image, and that really helped me drop away pictures that I love, but just didn't make it, didn't work in this context. And then, there were, I also thought, well, I've photographed Jeannie for all these years. I have to have one of the portraits of my friend Jeannie, or, my friend Jane passed away. And the picture, I don't know, it's up in the front. There's a picture of a woman with the dog, Jane and Alice. And I never considered it because it has I made a mistake in the processing. And so there's a shadow of another negative on top of it. So I didn't even consider it. But I wanted her in the book, and then realized that that was my prerogative and that it didn't really matter. And so that's actually interesting. That's something I definitely learned, that there's going to be this kind of opening for me in terms of, like, there's stuff that it just had to go away because technically it wasn't perfect, and that's not the case anymore. But I needed to have her Jane in the book too. So does that answer your question? Thanks. Yeah.
I don't know what to say. I feel like I need to say something, but I ask you something. I don't know why, but I think it's so interesting that you have this body of work that is so, I don't know, just kind of, all kinds of, it's like you're walking through a life, because he's not, like you said, not thematic, not subject matter. I definitely see the Jan Gruber influence. I definitely see the form, your abstract forms. But when it comes to the people, I see the light and dark. I mean, Draper to me is just Italian, But it's something about combining the landscapes and putting friends in your photographs. Like, I would never, I think it's very hard to put friends in a photograph, in a book, or photographs. To photograph your friends, because you have a certain responsibility to them. They want to look a certain way, or they see themselves a certain way. You have your vision, and it seems like that would cause a lot of tension. I know I don't photograph friends, but when I do, I'm usually it's something about them that's not friendly, but it's just so. Would you say this is your work? This book represents your work. I mean, because it's the approach. It's a style.
Yeah, for sure.
You have a style. It's not subject matter. It's not related to the person or anything. It's just your style that we see. And I have to say, one other thing I have to say, I love the photograph. It's my favorite. I like how you're using light sometimes. It's antithetical to how most photographers are trained to use light. You use like the spotlight, like many faces are in darkness, and like something like, Bart might say about the punctum,
Mm-hmm.
is this collar, like that one with the white collar.
Mm-hmm.
The collar is like the focal point
Mhm.
of the photograph.
Mhm.
Faces in total darkness.
Right.
I find that really interesting that you saw that.
Mhm.
It's like, did you struggle with that idea of not using the one? Not saying just move here into the
Yeah.
line.
Well, first I'd say nobody trained me. I didn't learn anything about light.
That's what it
Another,
was.
yeah, I mean, I never took a studio lighting class. So, I mean, there are a lot of things that, I mean, I feel like my work is very much instinctual. There was a lot of things that I never really learned that a lot of photographers know, you know. So, yeah, I mean, I guess, I mean, the hands of my friends is a really appropriate title, you know, because, yeah, I think that, yeah, we, that is really an important part of my work, and very, very happy that that was never a problem for me, but, yeah.
Yeah, it's very disorienting though, because when you see this, the title, and
Uh-huh.
it's sort of looking for him.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, there's
It's
some.
not so direct, yeah. I don't know, are we doing okay on time? We want to get a couple more hands, yeah.
Hi, you just used the word instinctual.
Yeah.
I was wondering, before you said that, how your knowing or your instincts of finding the image that you're then going to capture, how has that changed over the course of your career? And how has the kind of like magic of knowingness that here it is, how's that?
I think that there's a way that I feel like as long as I don't know that it really has, honestly. I mean, I think it's changed that much. I mean, I think that there was more confidence as time went by, and there's a sense of, you know, really knowing that curiosity, you know, what I was curious about was going to kind of lead me. But again, I think that, you know, when I'm working with people, that there's a way that we're kind of finding it together, you know, when it's portraits or bodies or things like that. But yeah. Yeah, sure. I love your hat. Unbelievable.
I have two quick questions. The first is when you were talking about making that photograph that's on the cover with
Yeah.
Alicia,
Mm-hmm.
and you mentioned the anxiety you had of, okay, I got to get this back home
Right.
and process it, and that you had more anxiety about that now
Mm-hmm.
than maybe when you were younger.
Mm-hmm.
Your mention of that just made me feel curious about that shift of the anxiety of making and how that changes. Just
Right.
because you brought it up
Yeah.
in the processing or
Yeah.
the transportation
Right.
of this sensitive material. Could you talk
Mhm.
about the anxiety over time? And
Well, I think that there's a way, I mean, honestly, I think that there's a way that when I was younger, and maybe this is just the nature of being young, that you don't, you know, I just thought I could do it. You know, I just didn't really question myself. And I think that, you know, as time goes on, I still feel very confident. I feel more confident. But I think, you know, that there's a way that now I'm very aware of, I'm talking more practically speaking, that it's more tenuous to travel with film. In fact, I lost a lot of work. I was in Botswana with my niece who lives there last August, and all the pictures that I made there and all the film that I traveled with was ruined, you know. And maybe that's another thing I've learned, again, that like I got Jane into the book, it didn't really matter to me anymore that that negative was marred, that I really maybe needing to kind of allow that evidence of failure and, you know, interruption come in. But I think, yeah, we're just very accustomed now to having things right away and not having to do the chemical process, and the fragility of that is heightened by the fact that it's really not so common anymore. Like I bought a Sony, you know, DSLR just because I thought, okay, can I really go to this place without a digital camera? You know, and I sort of thought, no, but then of course I never used it. You know, it's like, So, but once you know that there's another very viable way to make a picture, you think, well, I'm carrying film across the world to make pictures that I'm not going to be able to, so I think that is why it's more difficult now, because now I know that there are so many other ways to do it, or there's other ways to do it, But again, I think people find their medium, they find their camera, they find what they're comfortable with, and that's where I'm comfortable, so. Is that?
Yeah, no, I thought that was the case. I was just curious about that mention of anxiety.
Yeah.
Just generally.
Well, no, I mean, it just seems like there's more at stake now for some reason. I don't know exactly why. It just feels like, I know that there are, like, opportunities aren't endless. Like, I know that I don't know if I'm ever going to be with Felicia in the desert on New Year's with her family. It's just like, this is a moment. And I really would love to, I was so happy that nothing went wrong, And mostly things don't, but, obviously they have.
And then my other question is just about what your relationship between writing and picture making is. Like, does one influence the other?
It's new to me that I write first. So I never went to residencies, so I didn't have to describe to anybody what I might make. I found that really, really challenging because I just went out to work, in a different way. So that's relatively new in my life in the last maybe 10 years. And I find it really very interesting. Again, it opens a whole other door and a whole other way of working and framing my own work, and giving me a container to then kind of fill, So it's been interesting, but it's relatively new. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that seem like
Yeah. Thanks for all the great questions. Well, thank you, Regina DeLuise, for joining us. Thank you to CPW. Enjoy these amazing galleries.
Yeah, I wanted to just say one more thing about CPW, actually. This is when everything is closing down and shuttering and that you guys are doing this, it's so inspiring. Thank you for all the work and commitment. It's great. Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Regina. Thank you, Saskia. Next week we'll be joined